recommendations, which really go over the top of all of these actual chapters that we're looking at today, and many of those high-level recommendations simply refer to these more specific recommendations on each chapter anyway, and they relate to the statement of expectations, the council having particular regard to the minister's comments and clarity and consistency. So we should be looking at the high level recommendations. Perhaps we can do that at the end of the day and make sure that we take those recommendations across all of our chapters.
This is my punishment for the over speaking the deputy mayor earlier. I didn't get my cup of coffee.
No.
Never mind. Somebody else will take care of me, I'm sure.
Do you wish to take a coffee break? I think it's...
No. We will have a coffee break, and I might get Jamie to take over the chair for the next chapter, but I'd like to get this chapter dealt with before we break. So, and I know that's putting it very late, but I don't want to leave before this one's done. So what is the motion that we need to have on the floor in order to debate it?
It was raised earlier that you would like to move them one by one, so potentially under the general recommendations I have up there, we can just say approval for approval for chapter 5.
Does everyone want to do them one by one, or do you want to do this one by its... And you don't care about the rest? So, I mean, that's not true that you don't care about the rest, but that you don't mind about the rest being dealt with in block. So if we can get a general sign-off on this one, but we'll do this one separately. So we are going to, in relation to the natural hazards, chapter 5, stage 2 or 3, whatever it is. Part 2. We're going to agree to receive the minister's comments. We'll go back up. Can we go back up and just cut and paste or copy 6.1, 6.2, 6.3.
Depends whether you want to make any changes to the draft recommendations officers have made.
Approve the recommendations. So do you just need 6.1, 6.2? Is that right?
No, you do need, 6.1, 2, 3 and 4.
Yeah, but 4 we can deal with generally.
Okay, yes, yes, okay. And then 6.5 is the actual chapter itself, approving it to go out for notification.
Okay. So 6.5, so copy and paste. So is that enough for natural hazards? Receive the minister's comment, and just put natural hazards at the top.
Relating to, yes, natural hazards part 2.
Natural hazards part 2, just put in the top, yeah, natural hazards part 2. Receive the minister's comments and have particular regard to them. Approve the staff recommendations in response to minister's comments found on the draft recommendations table as amended. Approve the recommendations table incorporating any changes made by council as the report summarising the council's response and reasons to the minister's comments to be provided to the ministers before notifying the provisions, and approve the draft stage 3 proposes chapter 5.
Yes. Take off the S.
Yep, chapter.
That's right.
Yep, chapter 5, planning maps, definitions and appendices. Is that right? Do you need definitions and appendices for this?
Yes.
Yep, and section 32 and section 32 document.
Yes.
With any amendments according to 6.2
above, which you haven't made at this stage.
We're just holding Ivan from going out because.
Who? Oh, hang on. I'll have a look in a minute.
Could you just wait
Um,
Just take a sec.
Approve the draft. So, sorry. What? it says 6.2 and 6.4, but we haven't got 6.4. So
No, because that's the minor amendments.
yeah, so just
Take that
any
out.
amendments according to 6.2 above as proposals for notification on 25 July 2015. Well, I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Paul Lonsdale. So any discussion?
I just want some further clarification on, does this refer to, 4.79 on Cranford in the report? Comments, and are those comments only about
No,
the storm
there's a
and
whole
natural-
other section that we're coming to on Cranford Basin. There are ministers' comments on it and they're in
So
the
what's
report.
written in here?
Yes,
We're only dealing with pages 14 to
In here?
of the ministers'
of the
comment.
minister. You know this great big document that
Yeah,
we've been
yeah,
going
yeah,
through. It only deals with chapter 5. So here in the documents, we are dealing with the covering document 4.7.3. We are dealing with chapter 5, natural hazards, proposal for council final approval, chapter 5, natural hazards part 2, and the stage 3, section 32 for council final approval, chapter 5, natural hazards part 2, which we are amending with the recommendations that we are about to adopt that are in the big table. Are we clear?
Thank you.
Okay, right. So is there any discussion on the resolution? Yes. David?
Right, bear with me. Look, it's no no real secret that I hold differing viewpoints on a number of hazard management matters. These are generally predicated on many years of experience with our coastline and a keen interest in coastal and aquatic matters. These have been a lifetime interest where the principal focus of my degree in geography and geology. Some people may think I'm a climate change denier, and perhaps at times I may convey that image. However, I readily acknowledge that sea level rise has been rising at about 1 to 1.5 millimetres per year for the past century. In my opinion, climate change is influenced by a number of natural phenomena, not just the influence of man post the industrial age. And I have a strong concern re the reliance on computer modelling based analysis and question the science that is developing our position on coastal matters, particularly those related to coastal erosion and consequential coastal inundation areas. Throughout history, planet Earth has experienced significant fluctuations in temperature, sea level and atmospheric composition. There are many variables that drive climate change. Notable levers are astronomical, i.e. the position of Earth at any particular time in galactic cycles, lunar positioning relative to Earth, and now there is the obvious influence of their industrialised. Interestingly, geological carbon analysis indicates that there was more carbon in the atmosphere in Roman times than is currently present in our atmosphere. It is therefore quite evident in my mind that planet Earth is going through yet another cyclical period of warming and cooling. Even in the past decade, we experienced a period of cooling, and sea level rise has not varied much from the trends of the past 100 years. We have no hard evidence of how long the current warming process may last. However, there have been minor fluctuations up and down since 1997. Land levels have generally lowered in Christchurch post-earthquakes over most of the city, apart from against the Port Hills and the southern end of the Spit, where uplift has occurred. To that end, many areas have experienced sea level rise already. The greatest impact has been in the Avon River mouth, and the headland as well, and around the Bexley wetlands, where flooding and coastal inundation maps will generally concur. Although our coastline has lowered in level, our dune system is still advancing seaward, and we show no sign of coastal erosion. I now want to focus on the science behind the development of coastal hazard erosion zones and coastal hazard inundation zones. These proposed zones are based on computer modelling carried out by Tonkin and Taylor. I have had experience of modelling carried out by Tonkin and Taylor in relation to extreme wave run-up in conjunction with resource consent hearings over sand dune heights in the 1990s. A few years after the consent and conditions were approved, the model was proved to be faulty in that key data had margins of error of plus or minus 30%. The height of sand dunes was set at 8 metres, and now the generally accepted safe height to provide protection against tsunami surge is 5 to 6 metres. I have yet to meet with Tonkin and Taylor to gain any confidence in the data and modelling. The acceptance of this report, although peer-reviewed by a reputed peer reviewer, but one of similar ideological thinking, has huge ramifications on planning and mitigating works, and it is important to be absolutely confident in the resulting outcomes. There are many and varied opinions when it comes to climate change and associated sciences. For as many scientists who would argue that sea level will rise to extreme levels, there are equally a number who are very conservative. I am concerned that we continually use Tonkin and Taylor and do not seek any advice from scientists that may have a conservative or contrary view. We are an accreting coastline, accreting at significant rates. In recent years, there's also been increased concern about the frequency of extreme weather events. There continue to be a number of these, and the consequence of that is that the amount of material coming from the Waimakariri River will correspondingly increase, and the impact on calculations for coastal erosions. I note in the peer review report the comment: the sediment budget, in brackets input to system, calculation is very general, but probably the best that can be achieved with the information used, and in brackets the NIWA 1998 report, and I emphasise 1998. How can we be confident in a computer model that cannot possibly estimate the impact of increased sediment accurately and within reasonable margins of error? I am reminded of a quote. I can't remember who it is attributed to, but assumptions should be reasonable and evidence-based. The 1995 hearing on wave run-up also raised issues around the admissibility of experienced local knowledge versus expert advice, and that matter has been sort of talked loosely today. Ongoing, it is a matter of great concern as to how a considerable amount of local knowledge and experience can be recognised and given equal consideration in determining an outcome, particularly in projects where there is high community interest and often considerable angst. Peter Beck often trotted out the mantra of concern, and the frequency of its delivery often irritated me, but in hindsight, it's probably most appropriate. The wisdom of the people far exceeds the knowledge of the experts. It is my intention, therefore, to vote against the approval of the hazard chapters of the district plan going to the independent hearings panel and subsequent notification on July the 26th. I have already voted against previous chapters being sent to the independent hearing panel and will be consistent in my opposition. I do so because I have grave concerns about the science involved that has determined coastal hazard erosion zones that in turn affect coastal hazard inundation. Perhaps the more important reason for my opposition to new zoning and process by which it has arisen is for the people who live in the communities. The zoning, planning, repair, rebuild options have huge implications for these people. Costs could be huge, and insurance companies may view these areas in a different light. All of the variables that may arise will have a significant bearing on their lifestyle. Some local people would even go as far as saying it's a covert method of closing down parts of the city. We are now hearing people openly comparing areas that are similarly subject to future coastal erosion and inundation processes, but that receive positive treatment as opposed to their area that gets a perceived negative, dispassionate appraisal. Interestingly, we are happy for a school to remain open, although it could be in the long term in a coastal inundation area, and schools on higher ground were closed. We need to be signalling messages of learn to live with water, messages of adaptive planning, evaluating climate change over shorter periods and adapting, if required, as we go. I am encouraged by draft work in the resilience strategy for the city that talks of putting people first in recovery strategies. But I am less convinced about the robustness of computer modelling upon which we base the planning of our coastline and ultimately how it affects long-standing communities and their redevelopment. Our coastline is an area of the city that has constantly been underfunded, underappreciated and undervalued for decades. It's time to change the negativity for this part of the city into positivity and realise the huge potential. Sadly, at this moment, I do not think there's an appetite to achieve this, and I will be striving to ensure that we have reliable science and that we do plan to live and adapt progressively to any change in our environment that occurs in a positive and responsive manner. Regrettably, I'm also quite sure that once this report is released, there will be a tremendous outpouring of concern from coastal residents that will spur submissions against proposed zonings and the science behind them of a proportion that I believe has not been seen before in Christchurch. Thank you for your indulgence.
No, thank you very much. And I think it's excellent that we debate matters of such significance in a respectful way. So thank you. Phil.
I too majored in geography at university, probably started my papers in geography before David did, but have completed some postgraduate papers as well. And I think what's important is that despite our earlier training and experience, and in fact our role here is one of governance, and hearing the science that I've had presented to me, I have to say I've been highly impressed. I was particularly impressed by the science which was presented to us by coastal scientists from the geography department at university currently, and also how that science was joined up with the environmental coastal engineering which we had when we had the presentations with ECAM. And I've been similarly impressed today, for example, when we had the presentation in relation to the information that is going to go out to the people who live in Christchurch East. And I did not find that, I think the way that the messaging, the way we are communicating with our local people is far from emotive. It is actually based on facts and evidence, and the best evidence we have. What is important is that, in fact, and impressive, is that the evidence we have around coastal science is joined up with the other dynamics which have hit our city during the earthquake and post-earthquake. There's no question around sea level rise, except perhaps for very, very few. There'd be hardly any scientists who would really debate that now. And the history of, even of the last 50 years, when most of us were alive, in fact, that there's been 20 centimetres at least of sea level rise, probably gives us the best predictor. So, and contrary to Councillor East, I think that aspects which are covered in the natural hazards chapter, particularly the sand dunes, are hugely relevant for the protection of the whole city, not just the east. And so, contrary to Councillor East, it's with confidence that I am very happy to support the recommendations in front of us today.
Thank you. Any other comments? Glenn?
Thank you. I wish to make 3 points at this point. In thinking through this information, I am happy that the information, that the data is sound. That's not to say I'm aware of any effects on the community in terms of not only physical but social. And a key part of this will be, as the Mayor said before, the affected communities finding their own ways in which to disseminate information. As an elected member, I feel whichever part of the city I represent, and I'm called to be both a ward and a city councillor, that I have responsibility to ensure that information is put before the community and that the community has the opportunity to continue to obtain that information. In fact, I would be reneging on my responsibility. I'm only saying this for myself. For myself, I would be reneging on my responsibility if I did not contribute to ensuring that that information went out. Vicky and I have talked before about one of the root words of education. The way I heard it was educare, the Latin, and it means to be let out. And I pick up on the Tonkin and Taylor report that this is an iterative process. It will be updated. And going back to my first point, it will be about the community, but I think kind of walking into the information, taking it on, growing in their understanding and coming to their own mind, because they are intelligent. They have been aware of some of this information before, certainly in the South New Brighton area. They will want information, more information. They will want greater certainty. And it is really critically important that we do ensure that we get this information out, and I'm quite happy to support these recommendations today.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a final comment. A Lifelines report was prepared for our city back in the 1990s. It was instigated by those involved in our Lifelines, the Transport Agency, whatever it was called in those days, the Orion, our energy company, and all of these, and the focus of it was to look at an all hazards assessment of our city. What were the risks to our lifelines? It identified the extent of the liquefaction risk in this city. Some would say to a T, to a fault, absolutely to a fault. I mean, that's what produced it in the first place, I guess. The map it produced was mirrored almost exactly in the February earthquake. And so someone has got to ask, why did we allow developments to occur in areas that took no account of that risk? And that's because people didn't take the science, they didn't process it, and they didn't include it in planning. When I was a politician, I travelled the length and breadth of this country as the opposition spokesperson on civil defence. There was a big difference between visiting civil defence in small cities and small towns as compared to large cities. In large cities, I met with the civil defence team. In small towns, provincial New Zealand, they brought their planners with them because the planners and the civil defence were hand in glove. You can't have planning decisions if you don't think about what the impact might be in the event of a natural hazard coming to fruition. People use the phrase natural disaster. There's no such thing as a natural disaster. There is a natural hazard. There might be an event that is caused by one of those hazards. What is the disaster is its impact on people. And the impact on people comes if it occurs in a city, if it occurs where people live, where people work, where people play, where people are located. We had a massive earthquake down in Fiordland a few years ago, but I think the year before our first earthquake. That wasn't a natural disaster. It didn't impact on any people. Disasters occur when they impact on people, and that's what we've experienced here. Can we ignore a risk that we understand, and a risk that is being assessed not just here in New Zealand but internationally. I asked myself the question around the liquefaction risk that we knew that we had in the city, and I believe that we never believed that we would have an earthquake of the extent that we did, but we've always been exposed to the Alpine Fault. We know that we'll be affected by it, and there was, I believe, until what occurred here in Christchurch, a belief that the extent of the shaking, even though the period would be longer, that the distance from the epicentre would be sufficient to protect us from the degree of liquefaction which we experienced in February. I don't believe that anyone now believes that to be the case, which is why some time has been taken to get foundation methods and building methods right for building in a known risk environment. If we were able to go back in time, we would ask ourselves questions that I couldn't possibly have posed, and I've said this on a few occasions, I couldn't possibly have posed before the 4th of September 2010. Why? What was anyone thinking that it was okay to build unreinforced concrete slab foundations on the edge of a wetland susceptible to liquefaction and lateral spread? I wouldn't even have known what I meant by that before the 4th of September 2010. And so the truth is that we've ended up in a situation where we've had a known risk, there are known consequences, but none of that has featured in planning. And that's what we're here to do, is to notify a chapter for planning purposes. So do we only take a short-term horizon? No, actually we're legally obligated to take a longer-term horizon. And actually I'd much rather be in a position of living in one of these environments, knowing that I've got a council that's prepared to think in the long term and to give me information so I can make plans for the future, than to have a sudden residential red zone decision thrown upon me and being given an unpalatable choice of accepting a rating valuation at 2007 or nothing. Or in the case of those that were uninsured, a movement from 50% to 80% of the rating valuation of the land only, but that's another story. Risk and consequence have led us to talk about things that we haven't really talked about as a community before: mitigation, adaptation and avoidance. But the big, hairy question that nobody really asks and answers is who pays the price? Who pays the price when something does go wrong? In the particular case that we've experienced here, the cost was shared. It was shared in the Port Hills between the council and the Crown, shared in the residential red zone between people who lived there and the Crown and the insurers, depending on whether they were a rebuild or a repair or whether the finances fell a particular way. The truth is that the insurance industry will take a position on this, even if we don't. And so the question I pose to council is this: do we really leave only those who can afford to self-insure to carry the cost, to bear the burden alone? Because that's what not notifying this chapter would do. It would say to people, if the insurance industry decide to take on board the recommendations of the scientific evidence that we have and others have all around the world, and they decide that they're not going to offer inundation insurance in these areas or erosion insurance in these areas, anything that's going to impact on people's ability to know that they're protected at least after the event with an option to leave or to move on or to repair and rebuild, are we going to leave them to really fend for themselves? Because not everyone who lives in one of these coastal environments is actually in that category of the very wealthy enjoying the coastal view, which does happen from time to time around the country. Or do we take a community-wide view as a city and say that the very point of local government is to take on these challenges? And that's our role. So I would like this to be notified. I would like the independent hearings panel to sit in judgment, as it were, of the science, of the hard work that our staff have put into this particular chapter, which I really do admire, and to hear the evidence and to hear the concerns that are going to be raised by many of the people who live in these environments, and know that their council is willing and able and wanting to work with them in order to ensure that the best solutions are able to be achieved. So on that note, I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. No, and if you could record David East as no, and that motion is carried. And I've just had a note from Phil Clearwater, so before we break, that Ivan Thompson. Ivan, would you like to just stand up, please? I would just like to inform... Uh-oh, I've turned it off. I'd like to inform...
I sent it to you. Here it is.
Right. I would like to inform councillors that Ivan has been awarded... Oh, my God.
Shall I read it?
Why don't you tell us?
Well, it doesn't give me any free membership or anything, or a free bar tab at the conference. So.
How's that?
Okay. Ivan has been awarded a Fellow of the New Zealand Planning Institute, the highest accolade a planner in New Zealand can obtain in the profession. Congratulations.
Thank you, and it's been an absolute privilege working for the council, for the Christchurch City Council. It's a career that a planner would dream of because of the issues that we've faced, and not just now but in the past. And it's also been a privilege for working for successive sets of elected members and councillors, and the genuine commitment that the council has always had for the welfare of its community and the need for sound planning. So, thank you as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, so look, I mean, it's 10 to 12, so I think that we should adjourn now, and we'll come back at, what time today, 1:30? Yep.
1:30.
All right, so we'll come back at 1:30, so we'll have a longer break. That's your morning tea and lunch combined. Thank you, thanks for that.